topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the host and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio or its employees or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
Well, hello and welcome. Good to have you with us, Bill Martinez, and we're coming at you live. And for more information on the show, you can go to billmartinezlive.com. We're going to talk negotiation, and we're going to talk Donald Trump. You mentioned negotiation. You talked Donald Trump, especially in light of all that's happening right now on the international stage. And who better to have with us than a negotiation expert, Peter Johnston of Negotiation Advice International. He's advised corporations, governments, military leaders, entrepreneurs, and public figures from more than 100 countries. His brand new book, Negotiating with Trump, Lessons on Power, Influence, and Dealing with Extreme Bargainers. Peter Johnston, welcome to the show. Good to have you with us.
Nice to be with you, Bill. Thanks for having me on your show.
Well, I'm excited to talk to you about this. Negotiation has been a big part of my life experience as well. And, so when I heard about your book, I said, you and I have got to talk, to be perfectly upfront with our audience. This is our second interview that we had. And the first interview, I said, you've got to come back. You've got to participate in our weekly show where we can have a little bit more time to break this down. So thank you so much for making the time to come on the show here, Peter.
It's my absolute pleasure. I look forward to digging into this.
Yeah, a little bit of your background, you have approached this book, whenever you mention Donald Trump, politics comes into play. It's such it can be so polarizing, but you're clear that you're apolitical. I mean, you're looking at this and at Donald Trump and his personality from a political viewpoint, which I appreciate.
That was the whole goal of this book, was twofold, really. One was to analyze President Trump as a negotiator in a nonpartisan way so that we better understand him, what he's good at, what he's not good at, and that we can negotiate more effectively with him, whether you're a business person, a diplomat, a world leader, or a citizen looking to alter the current path or keep the current path, whatever it might be. Mm-hmm. And so that was the first goal. And the second goal was simply to use Donald Trump, who's an incredible case study in negotiation. We have few examples like Trump, where you can follow him across 50 years and see from business to politics where he's done well and where he hasn't done so well, where he excels. And by the way, I call him a genius in certain aspects of negotiation, mm-hmm. and where he has failings. Mm-hmm. And as a result, how we can learn from him and be more effective in our own business lives, public lives, and personal lives, even negotiating with our kids.
Well, especially when you look at a figure like President Trump, who has a big part of his life, Peter. I mean, he hasn't, just negotiated small packages. I mean, it's almost like if they're not multiple millions and now billions of dollars worth of negotiation, Donald Trump, rarely do you hear of anything that's insignificant that he's negotiating with, right?
Absolutely. In his book, The Art of the Deal, he talks about thinking big, and you can say what you like about the president, but he does think big.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so, and you refer in the title, you say dealing with extreme bargainers. Would you consider President Trump to be an extreme bargainer?
Yes. And I don't think it's a leap to say that. And what does that mean? There are two ways to negotiate. As a negotiation expert, just let me lay those out. One is that you act as though there's a set fixed pie worth of value if you and I are negotiating with each other, Bill. Mm-hmm. And that our job as negotiators is to fight to get the biggest piece of pie possible between the two of us. Another approach is called an expanded pie approach, where we expand the pie together by talking about our different interests, our mutual interests, brainstorming a whole bunch of options for meeting those interests, using standards, laws, norms as guidelines for what a good deal looks like, precedents, marketplace standards. And then we expand the pie, and in expanding the pie, we actually create bigger pieces for ourselves than we could ever get, even if we got most of the smaller fixed pie. The
Right.
president is definitely, and he says it himself, a win-lose guy who wants the biggest piece of pie. So he's working from a limited, in terms of an extreme bargainer, he's working with a more limited upside potential from that fixed pie perspective right from the start. Has he made it work with his own unique style? Absolutely. In many circumstances, he does. I would say objectively, Iran is an example where he took a fixed pie approach rather than starting with an expanded pie win-win approach, which he's now trying to get to, apparently. And that has undermined him on this particular negotiation. Not on all negotiations, but on this one in particular.
I got to tell you, speaking of Iran, because you brought it up early here, is that I'm a bit confused because I saw initially where, as you describe it, the pie was fixed, but then it seemed to be a bit dynamic because he tried to cast a vision out there to say, look at, this is the potential of what could be here in the Middle East and how it could benefit certainly the people of Iran, but he's negotiating with people. I mean, you talk about a fixed pie. I think their pie is very fixed, don't you think?
Yeah, I'm not saying it wasn't, but in terms of the president looking to change the status quo, I think he would have done well to change it from a fixed pie, from their perspective and his, to more of an expanded pie. And, when we look at this Iran deal, I look at two things. One is how was it reached and what was in it. Mm-hmm. And on the how, you look at who was involved, who wasn't involved, Israel in this case, the breadth and depth of conversations, and whether the process actually to get to an expanded pie increased trust and increased communication, made it more effective. Right. That's the how. The what are the terms and conditions of the deal. On the how, I would respectfully argue that the expertise was lacking at the table. I know that the president trusts Kushner and Witkoff and J.D. Vance to negotiate in a way that meets his interests. But what he loses there is the expertise required on a very tough set of negotiations that's very broad. And also threatening Iran, as he's done even over the weekend. The president, he does this as part of his extreme bargaining. He attacks you as a person, so you feel like less as a country or a person. You feel like less and you offer up substantive conditions is the hope. Substantive concessions, sorry. The problem with that is it shuts down the trust and communication, and we've seen that Iranian response. So the how here was not effective, the road to a deal, and the deal itself on the terms and conditions, I'd argue there is no room for a long-term deal here at this point. But there's room for a short-term deal, even if it falls apart in a couple of months, that meets both sides' interests in a breather. On the substantive side, I don't think Iran's going to give up its nuclear arms no matter what, now that it's been attacked twice in the last 9 months. And I think on the Strait of Hormuz, it's discovered a superpower. And just like if you woke up today and discovered you had a superpower, Bill, which I'm sure you do already, you're not going to easily give it up. And Iran has discovered that, exercised that superpower already, and that's going to be hard to get that superpower away from it, shutting down the Strait of Hormuz whenever it wants.
Peter, there's a lot that you said that I agree with, and and let me ask you this: what is the best short-term deal we could expect to get?
I think it's just buying time, stopping the hostilities, and opening up the strait. regardless of the longer term implications at this point. And this is just what happens in negotiations. You take certain steps and they either work or they don't. They didn't in this case. And so it's really taking, the president never wanted to get into wars as part of his campaigning. He was the only president we've had who has not had a military background or political offices. And on that basis, he was a breath of fresh air for a lot of people saying, we don't want to be involved in foreign wars. Well, he's now been reminded, and the president's good at testing boundaries and then going, I made a mistake. Let's get back to what I campaigned on. And that would be my best advice for him. Focus on the domestic economy, focus on getting the strait open, and just accept, I hate to say this, it may change in the months ahead, but I think we have to revisit what the costs are associated with not having Iran with nuclear weapons, because it's quite possible that will just be a reality like the president's experience with North Korea.
Right. Well, that was then, this is now, when you talk about North Korea and you look at it, and there's no question. And you said this the last time that, and you can't blame Iran looking at North Korea and saying, look at, the Hermit Kingdom has been protected because they have a nuclear weapon. And so why not us? The challenge I think that Donald Trump has, and I think, the world at large, is that there's been a lack of, substantive responsibility. And do we need another North Korea? Although North Korea is not seemingly as radical. They've not made a statement like Iran has said that they want to get rid of America and Israel. And that's their story. They've continued to stick to that. They haven't backed off of that one iota. And so you see what they did with, through their proxy at the Gaza with Hamas, what they've done with in Lebanon with Hezbollah, and the Houthis continue to be an irritant and tormenting, the neighborhood there. And the idea of putting nuclear weapons in their hands, it's a scary thought, Peter.
And I just want to be really clear. This is a heinous regime in Iran. Right. We don't want them with nuclear weapons. You asked my opinion as, if I were advising the president, what I'd say, and he's going to have to say, we don't want Iran with nuclear weapons. I understand that he has to say that. I'm just saying, what's the cost of that? We've seen the cost of trying to get rid of their nuclear program. Look, maybe they end up giving it up, but the cost will be tremendous if that's the case. And perhaps
I would not put any money whatsoever on them giving it up.
Yeah. Me as well.
Yeah.
And then I just wanted to soothe the concerns of some of your listeners on that front. I also think that it's somewhat been oversold that as soon as Iran has nuclear weapons, it's going to use them. I think that the odds of that are extremely unlikely, them developing and then using, because Israel already has a lot more nuclear weapons than Iran's going to generate, as does the United States. Iran's going to use those as a security blanket to make sure it doesn't get attacked. North Korea's done that effectively, so can Iran. Does it give them more heft in the region? Does it create more concerns? It does, and that is a concern, but it's a reality today that we didn't face, a year ago when, or even months ago, actually, if more of an expanded pie approach had been taken, like the administration is now trying to do with Iran, to say, hey, we'll give you all these things. The problem is you can't ignore the war over the last number of months that has created extreme distrust on the Iranian side, looking at the U.S. and saying, what can I actually trust you to follow through on, even if we do reach a comprehensive nuclear deal?
Right. And how difficult, Peter, in negotiations, the number one deal in negotiations, you got to know who you're negotiating with. And it seems that the parties have been rather dynamic here, at least on the side of Iran.
Absolutely. Now, it seems like they have found their counterparts, but the Revolutionary Guard is certainly now even more of a voice behind the scenes than it was before the former Ayatollah was taken out, and potentially more hardline. But even if it wasn't, we're dealing with a non-democracy. And that creates challenges for the president, who's got an election, a midterm coming up in just a number of months.
Well, so here we are. I mean, we're, in a sense, I feel like we're in a bucket of gum, and how do we resolve this, Peter? I mean, like you said, to expand the pie, and that was your recommendation. And that wouldn't have been new necessarily for Trump. I think he expanded the pie when he negotiated with Venezuela. He expanded the pie when he negotiated something like 5 or 6 peace treaties with warring factions who came into the White House, and he was able to expand the pie and calm them down. But this has been, particularly frustrating, for everybody involved, including the president, who's kind of used to, with a CEO mindset, you get through these negotiation situations, pretty expeditiously. This has probably been, I think, probably his single biggest challenge he's probably ever experienced in his lifetime. What do you think?
I think he's faced a lot of challenges at different points. And, my book, Negotiating with Trump, looks at those challenges and looks how he overcame them in certain circumstances and in others didn't. But, I never would bet against the president in terms of being able to pull a rabbit out of the negotiation hat. Mm-hmm. That said, I think he knows himself. Part of his advice in The Art of the Deal was stick to what you know. Right. And as a non-military leader, war is not something like this that he knows as well as he knows business deals, real estate deals, for example. Mm-hmm. And so he may have overstepped on this. He may have gotten some bad advice. But I will say this, Bill, a broader net to look at this is how poorly have the president's political interests and some of his personal interests been satisfied? Some of them have been satisfied by this war, despite the poor outcome for the nation, objectively, in terms of, I talk about this in my book, Trump presenting himself with power and authority to the world, generating fear amongst nations who might take advantage of the U.S. He's certainly shown that power and authority. He has dealt with some grievances he had with Iran over, he claims that they tried to interfere in the 2020 election and the 2024 election against him. He wanted to take care of his friends in Israel and his evangelical base. And in part, he was trying to do that, at least. And finally, I would say the president did need and is very good at creating distractions. The Epstein files at home domestically were not meeting his interests, and in terms of power of authority, and the chance to, combined with his other interests, launch a war that he thought would be shorter and more successful, boosting his power and authority, that was also a helpful distraction. So just to say that President Trump's got a wide range of interests. They're personal, political, and national interests. And some of those interests have been well enough satisfied despite the outcome on the national front in terms of national interests at this point.
Well, in the political arena, as you say, his vast number of interests have been brain bruising to elected officials there on Capitol Hill. It's like they can't keep up with him.
No, and it's one of the president's, what I talk about in the book, is one of his tremendous strengths. Man, I advise clients around the world on their toughest negotiations. Being up against President Trump in a negotiation, in many negotiation settings, would be a real challenge. Yeah. He's a huge networker up on the, on the Hill. He's and with the counterparts around the world. He is at his best of a fantastic communicator. He knows what makes people tick. He knows their fears. He knows what they want and need. He's good at generating extreme options as an extreme bargainer, and sometimes people say yes to those options. Boeing did on the presidential planes that the president bought, giving them to him almost at half price. Not necessarily the best outcome for Boeing in the long term, but that's another story. And he stretches standards. He's great in the courtroom. He's got, I argue in the book, he's got more experience than 99% of lawyers in going into courtrooms, and he knows how to use the court system, and he's great at threatening with his alternatives. I would argue, as part of his extreme approach, that he does that too quickly, too often, and it undermines trust. But the president has a whole array of strengths, and I hope that this experience in Iran, if he's willing to take the lessons from it and back off and lick his wounds and then go at it again elsewhere, re-empowered, taking more of an expanded pie approach, which is proven to be more effective than a fixed pie approach, the president can get back to his winning ways in terms of meeting his interests and the interests of the United States.
Exactly. We're talking with Peter Johnston. He's the author of the book, Negotiating with Trump, Lessons on Power, Influence, and Dealing with Extreme Bargainers. You know, often you hear, Peter, Trump talk about having the cards. When he goes into negotiation, he doesn't go in ill-prepared. I mean, I just envision him having like a deck of cards out there, and then each card representing what chip he has to play with and how he can manipulate it in order to get an upper hand in the negotiation. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely. Leverage is something he talks about in The Art of the Deal a lot. He mentions it in interviews, and he sees leverage as having something the other guy desperately needs. And in this case, in Iran, he thought that leverage was military power and military might. It turns out that Iran had as many smaller nations dealing with larger nations. Ukraine and Russia is another example. When you're limited in your resources, it can make you smarter in how you use your limited resources. And I think the president has seen that that leverage didn't pay off in Iran because they had sources of leverage, key pain points of the United States and Israel in the Middle East that he didn't anticipate being realized as they were.
Peter, some of these, countries, these Arab nations, particularly the Shia nations, they're ideologically fixed. I mean, they operate more like a theocracy, and for them, it's a matter of religious fervor. They're willing to give up something that most negotiators, they don't even quite bring that into the room when they're negotiating, which is to say that we've often referred to this group and this typology as a bit of a death cult. And they've demonstrated this time and time again. When you're negotiating with somebody that is so ideologically fixed, what's your recommendation?
Well, it's going to your alternatives often, right? Which is not to negotiate with them in a collaborative way. It's to take a fixed pie approach, but not to assume that just because you have those religious differences, as you state so clearly, Bill, that needs to get in the way of other interests being satisfied. And, with Iran, when you look at how sanctions have been used against them very effectively in many cases, how they want to get their oil to market. They've been cut off by the international banking system. They want to ensure that they have a stable population and stable control over that population. Heinous as it is for them to do so as they do, they have other interests other than just that theocracy and keeping that theocracy. So it's just to say you want to look at other interests to expand the pie that they do have. And the president and Vice President Vance are now, trying to meet those other interests through how they put this deal together. So that's good. But at the same time, in my mind, they got the sequencing wrong. They should have started more with this approach and used the big stick, walking silently with that big stick as the bigger threat than actually trying to use it and showing Iran that it actually wasn't as big as Iran itself may have feared.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but here we are. We're down the road, and how do you put the genie back in the bottle? You can't, so to speak. So here's the cards you're dealing with, and everything is out there right now. I mean, like you said, on one hand, you can set aside the theocratic ideology of this nation, set that aside for a moment, and you observe what was it that they wanted right away. They wanted a lifting of sanctions right away. So it tells you economically that they're feeling the press, that these sanctions did have, some effect. And this is what happens in negotiations, as you even explain in your book, Peter, is that as you go through the process, people begin to reveal their cards, and now you know a little bit better what you're dealing with, right?
Absolutely, and you learn as you go, and you try to, as I say, expand that negotiation pie so you're getting a bigger piece of pie at the end of the day. And we think, my advice always to clients and when I'm teaching is you've got to think strategically in negotiation, but act opportunistically, because as you say, you learn as you go. And I think there was the potential for a deal here that would have better met the United States interests. And perhaps the president got dragged in part into this war for other reasons that weren't as justified. And certainly Netanyahu would have been very convincing, Bill, saying, I know the Middle East, Iran's 2 weeks away from, nuclear weapons. We've got to act now. And if that was the case, hopefully the president's learned that he can't always rely on Netanyahu as his source on what's the best course of action for the United States. And this isn't to take away from protecting Israel in every possible way you can.
No. And I appreciate your perspective. I mean, you're bringing some sobriety to this. I mean, this, whole debate has been rather emotional. And you're one of the few people, Peter, that's saying, let's get it out of that and let's step back and take, a 30,000 viewpoint perspective on this. And what can we do to, as you say, expand the pie and, and potentially bring peace to the Middle East here. And, as far as, what you mentioned, the negotiators of Iran didn't help themselves either when they first sat down with Weisskopf and Kushner and stating that, well, yeah, we've got enough, nuclear dust here where we can send out 11 nuclear bombs. I mean, that's a heck of a way to open up the conversation.
I don't know if that's how the conversation opened, but I can say that, the reality on that the nuclear dust, the enriched uranium that the Iranians have already, is if and I may have said this to you already, but if you were my neighbor and you had a really valuable needle hidden somewhere on your big property or in your big house, and I wanted that needle desperately, I could take two paths. One is a fixed pie approach where I blow up your property and hope that that needle pops to the surface and I find it. Right. Or I can try to look at your overall interest, Bill, and say, how might I satisfy your interests on other fronts so that I can get that needle? And the U.S. With President Trump at the helm took, and Netanyahu's encouragement, took the approach of trying to blow up the property. I'd say they should have worked harder and longer, especially I think they would say this now that they're looking at the results, and tried harder to expand that pie through looking at other interests. Yeah. And that's where we're at.
Well, let's break down, and again, I appreciate the detail. I want to get more into, Trump's personality type. Yeah. And you address this in your book. Break that down for us.
Well, that's a fun question. I spend a whole chapter looking at his personality type, and most people don't look at this, but it's really important for understanding the president and his connection to potentially many of your listeners and watchers, Bill, because the president, if you know Myers-Briggs, and I won't go into all
Yes,
the details
I'm
of
very familiar with it.
Myers-Briggs.
Yes.
You are, right?
Yeah,
Well,
very familiar.
it's very telling in his case, and it's the most used. I know it's criticized, but for speed reading people in negotiations, I use it for my clients very effectively all the time.
Right.
And
I used it for team building for many years.
Yeah, right. It's very helpful. It's not the Bible, for gosh sakes, but it is a helpful guideline. And in President Trump's case, he is a high extrovert. He's what we call a very high sensor who has a great attention to detail, artistically as well, and versus being a big picture kind of person. He's more detail oriented. He's a high thinker. He looks more at what he thinks the right answer is versus impact on people. And then finally, he's what we call a perceiver,
right?
In that he spur of the moment, act on impulse, loves to act on his excitement, not think things through too thoroughly, but really to go with his gut. And so that combines to make him an extrovert, sensor, thinker, perceiver, an ESTP. We call that, David Kiersey, a behavioral psychologist, calls that a promoter. Mm-hmm. It pretty much fits the president. Of 16 types, he's a promoter. And so he's excellent when it comes to promoting a peace agreement, to promoting the big, beautiful bill, whatever it might be, or promoting himself. He knows how to do that. And just to be clear, that personality type connects him to, and not to overcomplicate things, S and P, sensors and perceivers. If you are someone who's got attention to detail and you're a perceiver, love spur of the moment, not planning ahead, being impulsive, that's 30% of the American population. And I argue in the book, Negotiating with Trump, that there's probably a disproportionate number of the president's MAGA supporters and evangelicals who are artisans, SPs, sensor perceivers, and that ties him to those people. They love him as a maverick, as somebody who goes against the grain of Washington. And they don't love authority just for the sake of authority. They want you to show you to earn your stripes with them. Right. So that's what the president taps into, and they love the contrast of him acting as a maverick in Washington as an outsider versus an insider, and where the president's at risk, of course, by going to war in Iran and having this outcome, is that his own supporters, who are diehard Trump supporters, look at him and say, this isn't what I signed up for.
Right. Well, because I would argue, Peter, that a good part of his followers, they appreciate his perceptibility and that he's a vision caster, a mission drumbeat type of visionary. And that's exciting. But a lot of the MAGA folks are judgers, which means they want conclusion.
Yeah.
They want results.
And they want results, exactly. And that's the challenge for the president. And again, just to go back to his appeal and how I believe the president thinks, is he says in his book, The Art of the Deal, that, and this is quite remarkable, Bill, he's writing this book laying out strategy and tactics, mindsets for negotiating effectively. And early on, he says, just to be clear, as I walk you through all this, when I'm doing a deal, I don't look back. I don't look forward. I just look in the moment at what I'm doing. And I can't even say what all these deals I'm going to talk to you about will add up to, but I love the excitement of doing the deal.
Yeah.
And the president's all about, I say, history books, if they overlook his driving need for excitement every day, for better and for worse, and it drives our headlines, they're overlooking a core part of who Trump is and his personality type. And so he loves to have an impact. He loves to, when he's putting up the new ballroom in the East Wing, he loves the impact of seeing that building, demolished and then going up, hopefully, from his perspective. But he also loves the impact of seeing the horror of many Democrats. What the heck are you doing? And that drives him. And so just to realize, even when we look at Iran, another piece the president gets out of this personally is that he loves to have an impact for better, but even for worse, and to have that excitement of the unknown, which he certainly entered into here when he went into a war that he didn't necessarily want to go into.
Well, the other thing to consider here, Peter, I mean, here's a man supposedly that sleeps only 3 hours a day. Maybe he catches a cat nap during the day, a bit here and there. I don't know about that, but maybe not. But he seems in some regards to be a bit of an adrenaline junkie. And, he doesn't do any alcohol. He says he's never had a drink, an alcoholic drink in his life. And probably if he did, he'd probably go overboard.
Yeah. So Susie Wiles, as you know, said he had sort of an alcoholic's addictive personality without the alcohol. And I think that's what you're getting at. He is absolutely, I'll just call it a compulsion, not an addiction, but a compulsion for, and we know behavioral psychologists have said this, for dopamine hits. We all are driven by those, but I think he, perhaps more than most, may be a thrill seeker looking for excitement. And look, it makes him an incredibly magnetic figure. I argue in the book, when we look at Myers-Briggs and his personality type, there's the possibility, just the possibility, the president is in the top % on each of his tendencies. And if that's the case, you end up with somebody who may be close to 1 in 8 billion. And that's what makes the president a formidable force and someone who could achieve incredible things, as a lot of your listeners know. The good side of Donald Trump, if he sticks to that good side and the discipline and appropriate constraints, can do remarkable things. The downside is when he's acting on that impulse and need for excitement without thinking through possibly as well as he could have and drawing on the right expertise, those people who could give him the counsel to end up in the right place for the nation.
You imagine the pressure, Peter. I mean, here it is, as gifted as he is. And as you say, you look back historically and you see a lot of great things that he has accomplished, exceptional things. And, you can't help but be in awe of him. But also you have to appreciate that he's like the rest of us. He's a human being. He can fail. He can make a mistake. He's made mistakes. So that's part of the, part of the journey that he's on, especially in light of all that he's dealing with. Peter, could you imagine being in a situation where here you are, you can go into this position, into a job and say, hey, you're looking out for the best interests of everybody. And then you got half of the people, maybe if you really broke it down, probably more than half, you got your clear adversarials. But then you have people that you think are your allies that are nipping at your heels for, human sake, for jealousy and anything else that you want to put into the mix. And wow, I mean, it's amazing what he's been able to endure, not to mention assassination attempts, the lawfare that he's experienced over the last 10 years plus. I mean, there's going to be books, post-Trump that are going to be written that will cover libraries. Maybe Barack Obama might have to open up some shelves to hold them.
Look, I make the case in my book that when you look at where the president was post January 6th, in terms of net approval ratings, in terms of being at Mar-a-Lago and trying to figure out his next steps. Would he ever be able to enter politics again? And you look at where he is today and how well he satisfied, in particular, his personal interests on a number of fronts, as well as the interests of many of his most loyal supporters and conservative supporters with his legislation, the Big Beautiful Bill. It's truly an almost unprecedented feat of negotiation and influence, negotiating his way to power twice in America as he has. So therein lies the potential of the man when he's at his best. And I'm just saying, and I would say it to Donald Trump if I were meeting with him one-on-one, is just in his book, he talks about the fact he likes to live in the moment, not look back and not look forward. I would just impress upon the president that looking back, not for a long time necessarily, but looking back a bit at what has gone wrong and doing an analysis of why this deal with Iran and his approach, that he could have taken a different approach. He can learn from that and he can apply it in the next 3 years in a way that better meets the nation's interests than what happened here.
Yeah, Peter, in my observation, that's what good negotiators do. I mean, they have they're casting a very holistic, perspective on everything, past, present, and future. That's been my experience.
Yeah, and so, with my clients, corporations, governments, high net worth individuals, when we finish a deal, the first thing we do is a diagnosis of what did we do well and where can we learn and do better. Right. And, that takes a high degree of confidence amongst my clients and stakeholders to be able to look at themselves and say, hey, okay, I know I can always improve. And so absolutely, that's the approach, Bill. And I would hope that the president's looking at what I've done, what we could have done better as a team here, even to this moment. And you look at what's going on going forward, how can we learn from those lessons and not just keep hitting our heads against the wall, whether it's in Iran or elsewhere, and not meet our interests and the nation's interests as well as possible.
Well, we're talking with Peter Johnston, negotiation expert of Negotiation Advice International. He's advised, as he said, corporations, governments, military leaders, entrepreneurs, public figures from more than 100 countries. His brand new book, Negotiating with Trump, Lessons on Power, Influence, and Dealing with Extreme Bargainers. And as we look at Donald Trump as an example here, there's so much for all of us, for the everyman to take away, Peter.
Absolutely. And, I talk in my book about how we can all learn from Donald Trump, his strengths, especially around the psychology of influence and informal deal making. That's where I argue the president excels. And, there are things that we can learn from his failings on more structured, formal, long-term deals. But there are lessons we can also learn from, the best negotiators across time. And I think in terms of those people, you can look at people like Nelson Mandela, who negotiated his way in the 1950s. By the way, we're negotiating anytime we're trying to influence someone to do something. So there is negotiating away from the table and at the table. And either approach can be more effective. When you're at war, by the way, I fully make the case we're negotiating. We're just doing it differently. We're using big sticks rather than smaller sticks at the table. But realize you're still negotiating. And Mandela did that effectively away from the table to get to the table in the early 1990s and the constitutional talks. And even then, Bill, he didn't go to the table directly himself in negotiating with the South African regime. He sent Cyril Ramaphosa, a union leader and former president, who he thought would be more effective and give him a chance to work away from the table and be able to have arm's length from those negotiations to be effective. So Mandela realized, as a great negotiator, you don't necessarily have to be face to face with your counterparts. You can, just as the president's trying to do with Iran, be the puppet master away from the table who is actually trying to exert their influence and be the great master negotiator, but you're not at the table. And that's one of the misunderstandings people often have about negotiation, is that it's all about the face-to-face. In fact, I would argue it's all about the how you're negotiating, less so the what, because the how is your roadmap to getting to the what you want to achieve. And it's also often away from the table, not at the table.
Right. Because sometimes when you're away from the table, Peter, as you know, it's a little bit easier to adjust, right?
Exactly.
And Trump kind of alluded to this the other day, and people kind of laughed about it and said that, in sending JD Vance, he says, well, if he gets it right, good. If he gets it wrong, it'll be JD.
He's toast.
So
yeah, what I have to say, in a nonpartisan way, it's just, that's the kind of thing I talk about in my book, that I know it can drive the left and the Democrats nuts. But the president has a sense of humor. He negotiates, which I think his followers appreciate. And he says a lot of things that most people would never say. Yeah, and in that case, that's appropriate. At least he's calling himself out on that. This is the game. I'm sending JD. If he's successful, great. If he's not, well, he's in trouble.
It's all his fault.
Yeah, it's all his fault. So that's kind of funny.
And sometimes, in some cases with negotiations, because you're not there, then you can course correct. It's a little bit easier because you're not, right. It's one thing to be face to face with somebody in a handshake and then say, this is what you agree on. And your own personal integrity, would bind you to that agreement, wouldn't it, to a certain degree?
That's one of the reasons Mandela stayed away from the table, was he didn't want to become overly committed to any particular outcome before he had time to think about it. But if he's at the table, people can say, Mr. Mandela at the time, do you agree with this? And he may not want to give a response on that. Just as President Trump staying away from the table probably makes sense in this case, so that he can survey his overall interests and decide at the end of the day, does the package as a whole that's on the table meet my interests well enough and the nation's interests to say yes. But it's tough to do that calculation in the moment. And sometimes if the president's looking to get a deal and thinks he can, that he knows is favorable, he'll go to the table directly himself, as he did with Boeing over his presidential aircraft.
Right, exactly. You say in your book, my aim is not to tell readers what to think politically. I love this because I think that so often that's probably the disease that exists in our culture today. I often ask people when they make statements, they go, who told you that? It's like, and so it's a breath of fresh air to hear you say, and as you write, I don't want to tell you, what to think politically. It is to help us understand Trump as a negotiator without judging him as a person, showing people where he genuinely excels and where he comes up short. And I think that's a good paragraph for all of us to consider in dealing with all people, because so often our instinct is to judge people. And if we do so, we could miss out on, as my father would, often tell me, he would say, William, there is good in everyone. Your challenge is to find that good. In some cases, it's a little bit more difficult than others.
Absolutely. And did he call you William when you knew you were in trouble?
Well, yeah. and usually he had my full command because with 9 kids, 5 boys, and he was a medic in World War II. And he also gave haircuts when he was in the European theater. So he gave everybody haircuts. So he brought that gift back home. And so he found that was an opportune time for us to have one-on-one time. And he knew how to, how to hit my heart. And and whenever he would say something like, William, I just want you to know your mother and I are very disappointed in you. And
yes.
Oh my gosh. Dad, I'd much rather you just brought the belt out and spanked me.
Yeah, you know what's so funny? My father said the same thing to me once, and just to from a negotiation perspective, to identify, not to be too nerdy about this, what's going on there is your dad separating you as a person from your actions, and he's elevating you by saying, "I'm disappointed in you and what you did because I expect so much more of you, Bill or William."
Right.
The best negotiators separate the person from the problem. Just because you and I disagree on something doesn't mean that we have to be disagreeable. And the reason I took a nonpartisan, balanced view in this book is I want everyone to learn what effective negotiation looks like, what it doesn't look like, and part of what it doesn't look like is, just because you and I disagree does not mean I attack you, because what happens when I attack you as a person? It shuts down trust. It shuts down our ability to communicate. And that would be my one piece of advice.
Right.
I'd have more than one piece for the president, but one piece of advice would be, even this weekend, to attack the Iranians and still talk about, we're going to, attack you militarily if you don't give us what we want, and say even we could attack you personally, physically. It doesn't help. And I know it's just showing his frustration and that he wants a deal, but it doesn't help. And so I would say the president could do, I do identify this in the book as something that we can all do better, and the president can. He's got to learn to be able to treat his counterparts without attacking them personally, and saying, okay, let's just get back to focusing on the problem and how we can solve that problem.
Because there will always be that time after negotiating, right?
Right.
Like you said.
Exactly. And the time after is in a lot of situations, Bill, in complex deals, getting the deal is even a long-term deal in Iran here. You can reach that deal. We may have nuclear compliance and everything else, but then people have to comply for the next 10 years.
Well,
and if there isn't that trust and respect and acknowledgement that the parties, I don't care about singing Kumbaya and holding hands. I mean, just the ability to have a working agreement, right, where each side knows what they're supposed to do and follows through. That is not unassociated with how you negotiated in the first place.
Right. Lest we forget the lessons of World War I, by the way. We've got to leave it there. Peter Johnston,
absolutely,
thank you so much. Congratulations on the book, Negotiating with Trump, Lessons on Power, Influence, Dealing with Extreme Bargainers. He is the negotiation expert of Negotiations Advice International. He's advised corporations, government, military leaders, entrepreneurs, and public figures from more than 100 countries. And the book available at all the usual places, right, Peter?
Exactly. Thank you so much, Bill. It was a pleasure speaking with you and your followers, and I'll look forward to a future conversation.
You got to appreciate the time. God bless you, Peter. Take care.
Ladies
and gentlemen, thank you for sharing a part of your day with us, and God bless you. And may God bless you and keep you, and may make his face shine upon you. May he be gracious unto you and give you peace. God bless you. Thanks again for being with us.